When I started writing a history of the internet and the digital future, my mission was to try and go back to the trends that are shaping the future in which we work and tease those trends out to their earliest genus, when they're at the most simple. It's kind of like writing yourself a dummy's guide by going back into a complicated subject and finding the bit where it began before it got complex. And so I teased those trends out. The more I studied the subject, the more I found there are really two stories. One is it starts in the dark days of the Cold War in the context of a nuclear standoff. And what happened was an American researcher realizes that mutually assured destruction does not work. The American communication system was so vulnerable that if the US received a nuclear strike from the Soviets, they wouldn't be able to strike back. And that took the word mutual out of mutually assured destruction. So they had to do something to fix that. The funny thing about the technology is that it took about 8 years before anyone bought into it. And when they bought into it, it was for a completely different reason. What happened was they took the technology that had been originally conceived for that nuclear reason and they used it to share computing resources. In reality, the computer scientists who were using this technology were actually just chatting about science fiction initially at that initial stage in the early 60s. I think the big change that we're going to see in the next few years is 4G. So we're used to on our phones 3G, that's a big deal. And back in 1997, we would have got quite excited because we had a few kilobytes coming to our handset. So we're terribly excited because, you know, in the last few years, the amount of data coming to your phone has gone up like that. But 4G means it goes up like that we have 1 gigabyte to the handset. Now what that means is, if you're in Croke Park and you're one of several tens of thousands of people watching a match, everyone in Croke Park could be uploading video and you could be seeing the aggregate. It changes everything. The real conclusion from this entire book, from the entire process, is that you and I, we're this generation who's at a hinge in history. And that the first bit that we're used to, what we're children of, is this industrial era where everything is centralized, standardized, there's hierarchies. And we have to adapt to this new digital era where, in a sense, every entity in this network is equally empowered. Now that's a very jargony way of saying publishers are no longer necessarily absolutely in control. They have to let a broad network of people in. One lesson that strikes me though is what the internet gives you is choice, availability, and very, very cheap information. What it doesn't give you is insight. So insight and trust are rarer than they were before, even though news and information are cheaper. It's a funny paradox.